So on August 5th, we got this story on CNN about the death of the Big Lebowski. It was actually the actor who played the Big Lebowski, David Huddleston. And, first thing that I want to point out, he dies at the age of 85, and CNN doesn't even report it until 8/5, even though he died on 8/2. This is exactly what the media does constantly. But this story has a whole lot of parallel connections to tons of other events. I even believe that it is connected, once again showing us that the Cubs are going to be in the World Series. So anyway, if you've never watched this movie, go to like Wikipedia and at least read the description. It'll make a little bit more sense. Basically, the whole movie is about these two guys who have the same name of Jeffrey Lebowski. And, it gets all confusing and there's this crime scene because one of the Jeff Lebowskis is a rich guy and his wife gets kidnapped. And the other Jeff Lebowski is basically, they portray him as like a loser, a big stoner who doesn't care about anything, and blah, blah, blah. And then their lives get mixed up together. So we have David Huddleston, who played like the rich Jeffrey Lebowski, basically. And then Jeff Bridges, who played the stoner type one. And just interesting, I know they're not the same Big Lebowski or whatever, but it's just interesting when you compare it to Jeff Bridges. So Jeff Bridges is 66 years old right now. If you read out the Big Lebowski, it equals 66. Also, in the movie, Jeff Bridges is Jeff the Dude Lebowski. Jeff the Dude Lebowski equals 82, and then Huddleston dies on 8/2. Also notice that Jeff Bridges, born on December 4th, 12/4, and Huddleston dies 124 days before Jeff Bridges' birthday on 12/4. Also interesting, The Big Lebowski came out on March 6th, which can be written as 3/6 or also 6/3. If you write out David Huddleston, it equals 63. And this date really stuck out to me. There's a part in the movie that's a famous quote from the movie is how he's having a bad day and he hates the fucking Eagles. And if you recall, earlier in this year we had the death of the Eagles stuff. We had the death of Glenn Fry, then we had the death of Randy Meisner's wife. It was also connected to the Philadelphia Eagles and also connected to the Eagles of Death Metal, the band that was playing at the Bataclan Theater in France when the attack supposedly happened. And I'll leave a link to a video I made in regards to that. Also, I'll leave a link in the description to my blog because I have a post on it as well. But what's interesting is that Randy Meisner's wife, Lana Meisner, she died on the 18th anniversary of The Big Lebowski being released then, and he hates the Eagles, right? It's just kind of funny. And I'll mention more about it in a little bit here as we move on. But I wanted to point out that Glenn Fry, he died on January 18th, which was 197 days before Huddleston dies. And this movie, The Big Lebowski, also takes place in Los Angeles, California. If you write out Los Angeles, California, it equals 197. I've also mentioned a whole lot about this Prince and this royal theme, which I will get to as we move along as well. But Prince and Jewish gematria equals 197. Even 3/6 or March 6th, the day that it came out, was the 65th day of the year. If you write out Prince, it also equals 65. So throughout the movie, there's kind of like just an inside joke about this grocery store, Ralph's. I mean, they talk about Ralph's, they put their buddy's ashes in a coffee can after they go to Ralph's or whatever. Just kind of an inside joke, Ralph's. I even seen, on Zach's blog here, he posted this picture from the very opening scene of the movie that literally has him filling out a check at Ralph's. And it's on September 11th of 1991. So pretty interesting date, September 11th. Also the year 91, which I'll get to. Very significant year. The guy who founded the grocery store was George Ralphs. Just interesting, he was born on September 23rd, a day we've talked a whole lot in regards to Pope Francis's visit to the United States. He came on his 923rd day as Pope, went to the White House at 923 on 923. A ton more stuff to that, but interesting, this guy born on September 23rd. Also interesting, he dies on June 21st, 1914, which was exactly 68 years before Prince William was born. Also, if Queen Elizabeth dies, Prince Charles might become King George VII instead of King Charles III. So just interesting, this guy's name, George Ralphs. If you write out George Ralphs in Gematria, it equals the identical thing as Prince Charles, 68 and also 131. But as I was thinking about it, Ralphs also reminds me of another character that's in this movie, John Goodman. And John Goodman basically is the guy who causes most of the problems in the movie. And in 1991, he was in a movie called King Ralph. And what's interesting about that, the reason he becomes the king in this movie, so he's an American, like a musician that plays in Las Vegas, and the whole royal family gets electrocuted while they're taking a picture, so they all die, and he's like one of the last, he's the next in line basically in the royal bloodline to become the king. It's a pretty terrible movie, but very interesting in regards to Ralph's being such a big deal and the Big Lebowski, and also just the huge royal theme that I keep mentioning. John Goodman then, interesting for, first off, he was born the same year that Queen Elizabeth became the queen. I mean, he just has an interesting birthday. She became the queen on 2/6, or also written as 6/2, and John Goodman's born on June 20th, which is 6/20. In numerology, you take out the 0, so it would be a lot like 2, 6, and 62. Queen equals 62 and 26. She was born in 1926. The year she became the queen, she even turned 26. Coronated on 6/2. I mean, lots of interesting connections in regards to Queen Elizabeth. Goodman also, though, when the movie King Ralph came out, he was 38 years old. If you write out the word prince, it equals 38. Also interesting, it was 2017 weeks. Just reminds me a lot of next year. The 306 prime is also 2017. You take out the 0. The 36, the Big Lebowski, came out on 3/6. It also says he was 38 years, 7 months, 26 days. 7 months, 26 days is also 240 days. 8/2, the day that Huddleston died, was the 240th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence being signed. The 82nd prime is 421. Queen Elizabeth II, born on 4/21. That's also the same day that Prince, the singer, died. The word prophecy also equals 52, so just interesting, I forgot to point that out. If you go from Goodman's birthday to Prince Charles's birthday, it's a span of 147 days. If you write out the Big Lebowski, it equals 147. What's really interesting about that in regards to the World Series also equals 147. And this movie King Ralph came out in 1991. And in the very beginning of the movie, when they go to get him, John Goodman's wearing this, the Green Bay Packers coat, also the Chicago Cubs hat. And even later on in the movie, he puts this outfit back on. And at the very end of the movie, they show that he had a kid, and that kid is even wearing the Green Bay Packers coat. And I'm not so sure about the Packers being in the Super Bowl this year. I feel like it's just they're foreshadowing Wisconsin, and they're showing us like the Brewers and some other things that connect to other teams. But who knows? Possibly something to do with the Packers being in the Super Bowl. I just think it's foreshadowing for the Cubs. I even just talked about the Bob Davidson throwing the fan out, and the last time he did it was in 2010 at the Milwaukee game. In the NBA, even Milwaukee, the Bucks were a good portion of the coding as to why the Warriors didn't win again. But anyway, this movie came out in 1991. Chicago Cubs in Gematria equals 91. Remember the Super Bowl in 91, Super Bowl 25? It was the first Super Bowl that the Buffalo Bills had lost, and they lost to the New York Giants because Scott Norwood missed the 47-yard field goal. Also interesting, I just made a video and I talked about something about the New Kids on the Block and how I wonder if I'd start seeing the New Kids on the Block. This, of course, was the Super Bowl that the New Kids on the Block performed at the halftime show. So interesting, but what I wanted to point out was the Buffalo Bills owner is actually named Ralph Wilson. Just once again, the word Ralph. Also, he owned the Buffalo Bills for 54 years. But 54, I'll leave a link to my video about the Chapman trade to the Cubs, who's even going to wear 54. 54, 45, very significant numbers around the Cubs. In Gematria, Buffalo Bills even equals 45, just like Cubs. Bills equals 54 and also 18, just like the word baseball, 54 and 18. Ralph Wilson, the owner of the Bills, equals 147 and 57, just like World Series. So I feel like there's a definite connection between that. They were showing us the 91 Super Bowl, also the 91 World Series. And the reason I say that is because the Minnesota Twins won the World Series in 1991. And we've had the death of Alton Sterling and Philando Castile were really big deals on this. They reported it on the same day. I also talked about how Obama went to Omaha, Nebraska, and then he went to Baton Rouge right after his State of the Union address that was on January 12th. It's the 112th World Series. The Super Bowl's played in Houston. Houston equals 112. Anyway, when Obama went to Baton Rouge, he gave a speech at McKinley High School. William McKinley, the assassinated president. And what's interesting about that, William McKinley died in Buffalo at the World's Fair, and his vice president who took over the president was Theodore Roosevelt, who just days earlier had gave a speech about carrying the big stick, and he gave that speech in Minnesota, actually Falcon Heights, Minnesota, where Philando Castile died. Baton Rouge is named after the red stick, right? So we got the red stick, and then we got Teddy Roosevelt giving a speech about the big stick. So, interesting in regards to 91 and the sporting events, two teams that made the championships were both connected to stuff I've been talking about this year in regards to Obama. Obama just so happened to be 54 when Huddleston died. It was 2 days before his 55th birthday even. And of course, Obama has the ties to Chicago. Hopefully that makes sense. I know it's a lot to take in. It's very deep. But last year we even had the death of Tyler Sash. And it also connects to Iowa. He was an Iowa Hawkeye football player. But it connects to Iowa in regards to the Iowa Cubs. But this guy died. He was a former New York Giant, right? Who the Giants beat the Buffalo Bills in the 1991 Super Bowl. But he was a New York Giant, an Iowa football player. And then earlier this year, we got the death of Kyle Callaway, another former Iowa football player, who just so happened to play for the Buffalo Bills. Iowa Hawkeyes in Gematria even connects to Chicago. Iowa Hawkeyes 145. Iowa Hawkeyes also equals 55. And I'm not going to read them all out here, but Kyle Callaway equals 55 and 145. Tyler Sash even equals 55. Obama just turned 55. If you write out Chicago, Illinois, 145 like Hawkeyes, but also the small way, 82. And of course, David Huddleston dies on 8/2. In my previous video that I made, I even talked about 1919 in regards to Chicago. And I talked about last year during the World Series, we had the NORAD blimp story. And I even made a video on that a long time ago, how it connected to the Iowa Hawkeyes in regards to them being the headquarters of Delta Chi, the fraternity, right? Delta Chi, which is CHI, Chicago is Chi-Town and whatnot. So whatever, hopefully you get the point of what I'm making, why I think it's connected to the Cubs. It possibly could be connected to the Packers, but we'll see. Want to move on, though. So in the movie, John Goodman's character is named Ralph Jones, that equals 118 in Gematria. Very interesting in regards to the Eagles stuff. Glenn Fry dies on January 18th, 1/18. Lena Meisner dies 1 month, 18 days later. The word death equals 118. Interesting too, election day this year is 11/8, a lot like 118. And in this movie, Tara Reid, actually, she plays the Big Lebowski's wife, Huddleston, the guy who died. And basically, she's the whole point of the movie. There's a crime scene where she's supposedly kidnapped or whatever, and that's the whole point of the movie. But notice that Tara Reid, born on 11/8, election day. She's even 40 years old. If you write out Tara Reid, it equals 40. Also 76. Her name in the movie is Bunny. Bunny equals 76, just like Tara Reid. Go figure. If you go from the day Huddleston died to her 41st birthday then, also election day, a span of 3 months, 6 days. Remember, this movie came out on 3/6. The Big Lebowski, also, the 18th anniversary was 8 months and 2 days before Election Day. Just interesting, Huddleston dies on 8/2. You know, the majority of the movie, too, is also around how they're at the bowling alley all the time. They're bowling. Even in the movie King Ralph, John Goodman requests that he gets a bowling alley in his private room in the castle or whatever. So just interesting, bowling equals 82 as well. Also, 3/6, the anniversary of this movie, was the same day that Nancy Reagan died, and Nancy Reagan died in Los Angeles, where the film takes place. She was also born on 7/6, so just interesting. Bunny equals 76, Tara Reid equals 76. We had the Philando Castile and Alton Sterling stuff that came out on 7/6. It was also the day that the Warriors lost to the Lakers. It was Kobe Bryant's 1,551st game, like 15-51. Remember, Donald Trump is 15 years, 51 days older than Obama. Pope Francis was 15 years old in 1951. Queen Victoria, the longest reigning British English monarch of all time, who was surpassed by Queen Elizabeth, even died 51 years, 15 days before Queen Elizabeth became the queen. The Cleveland Cavaliers even got Cleveland their first sports championship in 51 years this year. Cleveland equals 51. LeBron James equals 51. Cleveland Cavs equals 51. Quicken Loans equals 51. Interesting, in this movie, John Goodman's going to shoot this guy, or because he was going to mark it down an 8 or whatever, and he's wearing a Cavaliers thing. It even has the Cavaliers colors, and then they even show him on lane 23. LeBron James wears number 23. This movie came out 1 month and the Cleveland Cavaliers won the NBA Finals 1 month, 14 days before Huddleston dies on 8/2. LeBron James even equals 114. In regards to Nancy Reagan, though, again, I've talked a lot about this date, 9/19. It just seems to be foreshadowing a lot. It connects to all kinds of things. We talked about how it connected to Pope Francis's trip to Cuba. 9/19 is the 262nd day. Obama went to Cuba 26 weeks, 2 days later. James Garfield, one of the assassinated presidents, he was shot at a train station, and then he died 79 days later on 9/19. There's all this train symbolism with Pope Francis's visit to the United States. I even talked about the movie Trainwreck that stars LeBron James. LeBron James equals 923 in Jewish Gematria. I've talked about how it connects to Queen Elizabeth even. But September 19th, if you write it out, it equals 91. Jeff Bridges, the other Jeffrey Lebowski, equals 91. The Big Lebowski came out in 91. Or it was set in the year 91. King Ralph, though, came out in 1991. If you go from the day the Big Lebowskis came out on March 6th to September 19th, also a span of 197 days. Prince equals 197. Los Angeles equals 197. 9/19 this year to Queen Elizabeth's 91st birthday. Also just so happens to be a span of 214 days. You know, her birthday's even on 21/4, a lot like 214, 9/19, 214 days before that. 8/2, the day that Huddleston dies, is the 214th day of the year in a non-leap year. But also this year, that means it was the 215th day of the year. King Ralph came out on 2/15 of 1991. Leap year equals 38 like Prince. Goodman was 38 years old. Election equals 38. And also, when you think about Nancy Reagan and her husband having an assassination attempt by John Hinckley Jr., just days ago we got the story about how John Hinckley Jr. is going to be released from prison. You know, we also have Donald Trump running for president right now, and in The Big Lebowski, the only person who dies in the movie is Steve Buscemi's character, and his name is Donnie. They call him Donnie. They always say, or John Goodman's character always says, "Shut the fuck up, Donnie." So, you know, found that kind of interesting. The only person who dies is Donnie. Donald Trump could be a Donnie. He dies of a heart attack that equals 36. The movie came out on 3/6. John Goodman's character is Walter Sobchak. In Gematria, he equals 48 and 138, just like Donald Trump. Donnie also reminds me of the new kid on the block, right? Donnie Wahlberg, Mark Wahlberg's brother. And a while back, somebody had pointed out to me in regards to the Alton Sterling and the Philando Castile stuff. I talked about how they were showing the blue and the red, right? And they talked about something to do with Blue Bloods. And, you know, Donnie Wahlberg is the star of Blue Bloods, but I've never watched it, so maybe he's not the star. It just says starring him at least. But when you read it here, the series follows the Reagan family of police officers. I mean, how interesting is that, right? We have the release of John Hinckley Jr. coming up. Then the death of the Big Lebowski is even connected to Nancy Reagan's death. Then we got the Reagan family. Donnie dies in the movie The Big Lebowski. So, just a few other things I want to point out in regards to the royalty theme and whatnot, and in regards to the movie King Ralph. When I rewatched the movie, there's a guy trying to sabotage him in the movie, and he's trying to bring back the House of Stuart. Right? The House of Stuart began with King James I, the guy who made the King James Bible. Also then his son, King Charles I, was part of the House of Stuart, and then his son, King Charles II, and whatnot. All of the House of Stuart. I've talked about the English Civil War. Tons and tons of stuff to it in regards to Prince Charles becoming King Charles III, possibly. In this movie, though, when he's the king, King Ralph, he falls in love with a non-royal, and her name in the movie is Miranda Green. So just interesting. We've had a lot of references to Green as well. Green equals 49. Revelation equals 49. Even the Dallas stuff, they had the big green building. You had Draymond Green in the news showing his dick and all kinds of other stuff. Even when I'm thinking about it, Amon Green, who played for the Green Bay Packers, also connects back to the Nebraska Cornhuskers, with the death of Sam Foltz, who died in Wisconsin. You know, just the parallels never end. But moral of the story, Ralph falls in love with a non-royal, and in the actress who plays her name is Camille, and Prince Charles's wife right now is Princess Camilla. I found that pretty interesting. If you write out, and I don't like doing this all the time, but if you write out Packers win Super Bowl 51, it equals 134, just like King Charles III. You know, sometimes these big phrases, though, don't mean anything. I didn't write Green Bay on there. Who knows? You know, just pointing it out. But the Packers were established in 1919, you know, a year that I talked about connected to Chicago a lot. Also, you know, in the Super Bowl, the Buffalo Bills had 19 points in the Super Bowl that was in 1991. The Super Bowl happened 19 days before the movie King Ralph came out in 1991. There's a lot of interesting things. I know I'm rambling. I'm not trying to, but they all make sense. So, the Super Bowl even had Whitney Houston sing the national anthem. Just think about the Super Bowl this year is going to be held in Houston. Houston equals 112. It's the 112th World Series this year. Also interesting that this Super Bowl, it says, was the first to feature two teams representing the same state, right? And In the last video, I talked about Field of Dreams, foreshadowing the Subway series of the Giants and the Oakland A's in 1989, the one that had the Loma Prieta earthquake. And just interesting, Ralph Wilson, the owner of the Buffalo Bills, was born on October 17th, 1918, and that was exactly 71 years before the Loma Prieta earthquake at the World Series. So just some stuff to think about. Want to just finish it off here. So if you write out Cubs Packers equals 137. If you write out, before he became King Ralph, his name was Ralph Hampton Gainsworth Jones, it equals 137. Also, if you write out bowling alley, which I think there's something significant about bowling, it also equals 137. And what I think is so significant about bowling is the fact that I've talked a lot about this, an X theme. And if the letter X in Jewish gematria is 300, just like a perfect game, right, in bowling, if you get all strikes that you mark down as an X, it equals 300. X super important to bowling. I mean, even if you write the word strike, and even think about it in regards to baseball, when you swing and you miss, you get a strike. But strike equals 82, just like bowling. So, whatever, I'm going to leave it at that. Have a good one.